So, getting ready for my fight with Chad, I had just like some cognitive issues that kind of started that I thought were all linked to a concussion. I started to have like balance problems, coordination problems, and a lot of headaches. And I had a doctor think that might have been a concussion, obviously from what I do. But then these symptoms got worse with rest, and I just progressively was getting sicker and sicker, and the symptoms were getting worse and worse. So I had to start looking at, like what is causing this, and we kind of went down the whole route of trying to figure out neurologically, if this was a concussion, if this was, something a little bit more serious. So it all kind of just started with that. A lot of neurological problems, a lot of brain fog, a lot of fatigue, headaches, nausea, dizziness, and I was forced to withdraw out of that fight. Yeah, I was getting extremely frustrated because I would go into the hospital and I didn't really divulge too much into, how bad things really did get. I ended up developing an adrenal gland tumor. I ended up developing high blood pressure. I ended up developing seizures, fatigue, joint pain, headaches. I ended up getting sepsis in the hospital. They found that there was an infection that went viral, and it caused encephalitis in my brain. And these are all things that I had to push for them to find out. In the beginning, they were telling me, "Oh, you have anxiety and you have concussion." I'm like, "Oh, I haven't been punched in the head in almost a year, and these symptoms are getting worse. They're not getting better." I've had a concussion before. I know what a concussion feels like. This wasn't a concussion, and I had a feeling the whole time. I just couldn't figure out what else it could be. Prior to that, I've been a healthy person. I train 2 to 3 times a day. I coach 2 to 3 times a day. I eat right. I take care of my body. I don't drink. I don't use drugs. And, they always just ask me, like, trying to blame everything on anxiety. And, I had blood pressure higher than someone who's, had multiple heart attacks and strokes. And they're trying to tell me that it's all in my head. And I'm like, it was a very frustrating thing to deal with, because they're not in my body, and now I know what I'm feeling, and I knew I wasn't right. It got to a point where I was so sick that I actually lost use of my legs. I couldn't walk. I'd have to get, my girlfriend at the time to help carry me around everywhere, just bring me doctor's appointments, trying to figure out what was causing all this. And, they then bring me into the hospital. They call me back in because they said a doctor shouldn't have released me because my right adrenal gland was failing. So I have to go into the hospital now, and they start pumping my body with cortisol because my cortisol levels were dropping so low. And then after that, they say, and then I have another doctor who comes in and says, "Yeah, you need to relax, you need to go home." And I'm like,
how many times did you get sent home?
I got sent home over 8 times, and I got called in 5, 6 times. I was bouncing around from doctor to doctor to doctor, which was kind of almost a mistake on my part. When I found a good doctor, it was hard in that time because I had so many things that felt like they were like life-threatening emergencies, like just randomly fainting out of nowhere, randomly, I started to develop seizures. So all these things make you believe that this is a thing to go to the hospital for, and then they tell me there's nothing wrong, you're fine, you have anxiety. And I'm like, what are you talking? You don't get seizures from anxiety. You don't get this high blood pressure from anxiety. You don't develop a tumor from anxiety. you don't get sepsis from an anxiety. Yeah, it's just like at some point I was just, for me, I've never been a suicidal person in my life. I never have gone to that place, but I was just so defeated. I was so like, I don't know what the word for it is. It's like, I was just tired of suffering.
Basically run down.
I was just at a point where I didn't know what else I could do. I went to the hospital. I took my medications I was told to take. I went to every doctor's appointment. I booked with every specialist, and then I was just getting worse and worse and worse. And then luckily I had a lot of fight in me, in the sense that like I would see what I wanted for my future, and that's what kind of just kept me there the whole time. And you know, it was just a really difficult place to be in when you're 26 years old. You had every opportunity in the world, and you know, my life prior to all this wasn't, you know, necessarily always the brightest and the greatest. You know, I had a lot of struggles growing up, and I've worked so hard for so long to get myself in a place where, you know, I was making all my dreams and everything come true, and then it's all being taken away from me from something that I don't know. Like, I don't know how to fix this at this point. I was just so broken, so defeated. I mean, you know, there was definitely like suicidal thoughts. There was definitely depression. There was, you know, there was a lot of things that obviously like went through my mind during a time like that. Yeah. My doctor, Dr. Mansingh, he drew some blood work one day. He wanted to order these additional tests that the hospital didn't run, and then they found a infection in my body, Epstein-Barr virus. And with that, because my immune system was so weak at that point, when they found the infection, they discovered that it was attacking my body's healthy cells, and it caused encephalitis in my brain. And on top of that, there was a bacteria found in my culture, and they ended up, you know, they ended up putting me on life support antibiotics. I was in the hospital, I was in the ICU. So really the help of him, and then when I went into the hospital, I went into Richmond Hospital, and they ended up finding, obviously, that my blood was infected. You know, you know, when you have sepsis, it's not a secret that that's a pretty life-threatening thing to happen to you. And you know, my entire skin was gray and yellow. I had blood spots all over my body. Breathlessness, my blood pressure dropped so low. I had like cold chills, and really at that point, I didn't have really anyone like in my life that much, so I just had this feeling that day that I'm like, I should go to the hospital, because I think this time there's something really wrong. And just like along my arm, there was this thing that looked like a rash, but when I would push into it, it would just, my entire skin would just turn black and green, and my eyes were yellow, my fingers were yellow. I had an infection in my liver, infection in my brain, infection that went, you know, basically systemic throughout my whole body. And it was, yeah, it was finally killing me. They ended up doing a CT scan of my stomach, and they found that the infections were being caused by a bacterial overgrowth that was on the lining of my intestinal wall. So with that, they did a colonoscopy, and they could see that it was on my colon, so they removed that. You have to go on antibiotics for all these things as well, and I was already doing that with the sepsis infection. They could see that I had a bacterial growth that was starting on the lining of my lung, which is, on my esophagus, which is, they think was causing my breathing problems. So then they go down there, they scrape it out, and again, I'm already on the antibiotics that, would be killing these things anyways, so I was lucky I was there. And then they end up, running all these tests, additional tests, and then I finally met a doctor who it was like one of the most relieving things in the world, and he said, you're not crazy. He's like, and he said, I'm sorry that, this has happened to you. And it was just 7-8 months of just continuous suffering and just nobody believing me, and even people that were close to me in my life thought I was crazy, and I was losing my mind. And yeah, it was just it wasn't relieving that I knew something was wrong with me. It was relieving that someone was finally giving me some answers. With everything my body went through, I developed something called multiple autoimmune syndrome. So I have 2 autoimmune diseases that I deal with still. So it's still a process, right? It's still a process getting there, but in comparison to where I was, I'm a million times better than where I was, you know what I mean? And I guess in that, us as fighters, we pride ourselves on being tough and resilient and people that push through things and physical pain. I really did have to learn about fighting at a whole other level. There's no training session or fight that I've ever been in my life that was as hard as that. So yeah, I guess I am proud that, I stuck with it. It was just a really hard time in my life, and I'm glad that, I stayed through it all. I think the biggest relief of everything was just knowing that, not only was I not going to die, but when I could start to feel my body, I went from not being able to walk to I'd go for a 10-minute walk at the beach, and then I would, I still couldn't exercise, but I would go hang out with a couple friends, and then when the first day I tried to do some training, I would get sick, and then I would try again, and I'd make it through a little bit more, and a little bit more, and then a little bit more. All of a sudden, I'm grappling. All of a sudden, I'm doing sprints. I'm hitting pads again. I'm sparring. I've even done some sparring. And if you were to ask me last year at around this time where I think I would be, this definitely wasn't the place. 100%. I will be back in the cage this year. 100%. I'm. Like I said, I wasn't doing all this and pushing to get better as hard as I was so I could just live. I was doing all this because this is my fucking dream. I worked my ass off my entire life to get here, and I'm not gonna let any illness, any doctor, anyone, anything get in the way of that, and for me, I was it's so weird. When I was in the hospital, one of the only things I was thinking about the most was I'm never gonna fight again. And I knew fighting always meant a lot to me, and I knew martial arts always meant a lot to me, but when you're on your deathbed and you're just thinking about I wanna train again, I wanna fight again, and I would be in tears almost every night thinking about my career was going to be over, and even worse that I was going to be a cripple. I couldn't even train anymore. And, and I get diagnosed with this disease, and then, oh no, it's this disease and this and this. It makes me want to get back at it even more than I did before, even more. I'm so motivated to just go out there and just leave it all out there. Like, honestly, just leave my like heart and soul in the cage, because I just know from going through what I did, I'm meant to do this. 100% I'm meant to do this. And I don't fear any man out there. There's no thing that a man can do to me that illness in that time of my life hasn't done to me. You know, it doesn't, fighting in the cage doesn't have the same fears and stresses that it used to have. You know, the perspective of that I've gained through that experience and in life is just like, it's forever changed me in a good way, in the sense that, you know, I just want to be the best martial artist, the best fighter, the best human being I can possibly be, and I want to go out there and I want to fight. I want to get in there with someone high level, high skilled, and put on a show.